The room fell silent, an almost suffocating hush, heavy enough that you could hear the faint tremor of her breathing over the low murmur of whispers. Her name was Janelle, and at 17 she had faced more hardship than most people see in a lifetime. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Dressed in a simple black dress, worn from years of hand-me-downs, she stood trembling at the front of the grand funeral hall, the polished marble floors reflecting the flashing cameras of onlookers who were too curious to look away. Across from her, Mrs. Caldwell, a woman whose sharp heels clicked with every word like the chime of a judge's gavel, sneered openly. Her lips curled into a cruel smile, eyes scanning the crowd for validation. "I can't believe they actually let you sit in the front row," she said, her voice loud, cutting through the room like a whip. "Do you even belong here? Are you sure you're related to him?" The words hit Janelle like ice water, shocking her senses into hyper-awareness. Every eye seemed to focus on her trembling figure, some filled with judgment, some with pity, and a few, she could swear, malicious enjoyment. Cameras from phones waved like torches in the dim light, capturing her humiliation for anyone who wanted to share it online. Her chest tightened. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the ornate carpet beneath her feet, but she couldn't, not yet. Mrs. Caldwell leaned closer, her face twisted with smug satisfaction. "Honestly," she whispered, though everyone could hear, "you look like you crawled out of the wrong side of town. Your father wouldn't want us to see this. You're embarrassing him even in death." Janelle's lips quivered. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. Her hands, clenched tightly in front of her, shook violently. The whispers of the crowd grew louder, a mixture of sympathy, amusement, and judgment. She could feel every gaze like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, and yet even in that moment a spark of defiance refused to die. She straightened her back, trying to breathe through the rapid beat of her heart. I'm his daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it was a start. Mrs. Caldwell laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound that echoed off the marble walls. "His daughter, please," she sneered. "I doubt anyone here would even recognize you if you weren't standing in his shadow. Do you think you deserve to be here? Look at you, nothing but a poor girl pretending to belong in a place she's too small to even understand." Janelle's eyes filled with tears. She could feel the heat rising to her face as whispers turned into murmurs and murmurs into audible snickers. Some in the crowd raised their eyebrows, others smirked, but no one spoke up to defend her. In that hall, surrounded by strangers and distant relatives alike, she felt utterly alone. And yet, there was a presence she didn't notice at first. In the far corner of the room, near the back, a figure stood partially hidden behind the grand columns, watching her. The stranger's gaze was steady, almost piercing, as if they already knew the truth of her father's will, the secrets hidden in envelopes stacked on the ornate table behind the podium. The person's expression didn't betray judgment or malice, only an understanding that something monumental was about to unfold. Janelle's throat tightened. She could barely breathe as Mrs. Caldwell's mocking continued. "Do you really think you have a place here? People like you." She waved a hand, dismissive and condescending. "Don't get to sit where the important people are, don't get to speak, don't get to inherit anything." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "And yet somehow your father trusted you." The crowd tensed, cameras clicked, phones recorded, and in that unbearable silence that followed, Janelle felt like the air itself had grown heavier, pressing against her chest with every shallow breath. Her mind screamed for escape, but her feet were rooted to the ground. It was then that the thought hit her, just a flicker but sharp and insistent. Someone knew something that could change everything. Someone in this crowd was holding a key to justice, someone who had the power to stop the mockery and turn the humiliation upside down. And just as Mrs. Caldwell leaned in for another cutting remark, a faint but commanding voice came from the back. Janelle couldn't quite place it, but it resonated deep in her chest, bringing a shiver of hope. "That's enough." The words sliced through the room, startling everyone. The whispering stopped. Mrs. Caldwell straightened, her smug expression faltering just slightly. The stranger at the back, the one no one had paid much attention to until now, stepped forward. Their presence radiated authority, calm, and unshakable confidence. And Janelle's heart thumped in her chest with the unbidden hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change. The camera angles shifted slightly, capturing her wide, terrified eyes and the subtle nod of recognition from the stranger in the corner. Something was coming. Something that would make everyone in this room rethink everything they thought they knew about her. But before that could happen, let's rewind. Let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The morning sun had barely broken through the dense clouds when Janelle stirred awake. The small apartment she called home smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and old wood, a reminder of the life she had grown up in, humble, crowded, but filled with small pockets of love. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling in places, but each photograph tacked unevenly along the living room shelves told a story of care. A birthday celebration with her little brother, a graduation from the local community school, her father's proud smile beaming in the corner of one frame. At 17, Janelle carried a quiet strength, a resilience born of years of enduring hardship without letting bitterness take root. Her mother had passed away when she was just 10, leaving her father, Mr. Thompson, to raise her and her younger brother, Malik, alone. Mr. Thompson was a hardworking man, tending to 2 jobs at once, yet he always made time for small lessons about dignity, compassion, and the importance of education. Janelle often remembered the evenings when he would sit her down at the kitchen table, worn hands tracing the edges of bills and receipts, and say, "Janelle, life will not give you favors, but you can give yourself courage." This morning, courage was something she desperately needed. She slipped out of the thin blanket that barely kept her warm, careful not to wake Malik, who was curled up in a threadbare quilt on the floor beside the bed. Her bare feet touched the cold linoleum as she tiptoed to the small kitchenette, where she poured a cup of lukewarm water from a chipped mug. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of the neighbor's television and the soft creak of the building settling. Janelle's hands moved with habitual care as she prepared a meager breakfast for herself and Malik, 2 slices of bread, dry but filling, and a thin smear of peanut butter. There wasn't much left in the pantry, but she always found a way to make it enough. She thought about the day ahead, her father's funeral. She had washed the only clean black dress she owned the night before, ironing out the wrinkles with trembling fingers, hoping it would be enough to honor her father. She had no idea that this simple act of preparation would put her directly in the path of cruelty that very morning. As she moved about the small apartment, Janelle paused by the window, staring out at the cracked pavement of their neighborhood. Children chased each other down alleys, their laughter ringing like tiny bells against the backdrop of graffiti-covered walls. Women carried groceries in worn bags, men argued softly over cards or street games, and somewhere nearby a bus honked its weary horn. Life carried on, indifferent to hardship, yet Janelle drew hope from it. She had always believed that even the smallest kindness, a smile, a helping hand, a whispered word of encouragement could carry someone through the darkest hours. Her father had been her guiding light, the one who taught her to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. "Even if life hits you," he had said during one of his rare, quiet evenings at home, "remember your heart is your compass. Let it lead you toward goodness, not revenge." She clutched that memory like a lifeline, feeling both grief and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her young shoulders. Malik stirred in his sleep, mumbling softly, and she kissed his forehead. "I'll do my best," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for you, for Dad." Janelle's morning routine was simple but deliberate. She gathered the few belongings she would need: a small, worn purse, a notebook filled with school notes and scribbled dreams, and a letter from her father she had never read, saved for a moment she didn't fully understand. She looked in the cracked mirror near the doorway, her reflection faint but unmistakably strong. There was fear there, yes, but also resilience, a quiet defiance that refused to be erased by poverty, judgment, or circumstance. Her neighbors, a mix of elderly residents and working families, greeted her as she stepped into the hallway. A nod here, a soft "good morning" there. She smiled back, her heart quietly warming at these small connections. Despite the hardships, Janelle's world was not devoid of love. She carried dignity in the way she moved, in the gentle tone she used with everyone, from the street vendor to the mailman. And in that dignity, even in such humble surroundings, lay the seed of courage that would soon be tested. The neighborhood, though modest, was alive with texture. Peeling posters on the lamp posts, stray cats weaving through alleyways, the faint aroma of baked bread drifting from the corner bakery. Janelle inhaled deeply, savoring the small peace this morning offered. She could feel the tension of the day ahead, but she focused on the familiarity of her home, her brother, and the life her father had built for them, imperfect but precious. And then, as she turned to leave the apartment, a pang of dread struck her. Today was more than grief. It was uncertainty, judgment, and a looming confrontation she couldn't avoid. Her heart tightened, knowing that the world outside those worn doors would not be kind. But she squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "I will carry him with me. I will not be ashamed." With that, she stepped out into the world, a small, determined figure in a vast, unfeeling city, unaware that every footstep she took this morning would lead her straight into a storm she could never have imagined, where humiliation, courage, and fate would collide in ways she could not yet comprehend. Janelle stepped out of her apartment, the morning air heavy and damp from the early fog that clung to the streets. She clutched her worn purse close to her chest as she walked past familiar neighbors and alleys filled with the hum of life. But this morning, her mind wasn't on the sights or sounds of her neighborhood. Her thoughts were consumed by one terrifying reality. Her father had left her with a debt she couldn't hope to repay, and her brother's health was failing. Just yesterday, the doctor's words had hit her like a physical blow. Malik needed medicine, specific life-saving medication that cost more than she had ever held in her hands. She had exhausted every option, pleading with the pharmacy for credit, calling local clinics, even selling the small belongings she had kept for herself over the years. Nothing had worked. The bills piled higher than her courage could carry, and every tick of the clock felt like a drumbeat reminding her that time was running out. Her stomach knotted, not from hunger, though she had skipped meals, but from dread. Malik, only 10, had woken that morning with a persistent cough that rattled through his small chest. She had given him water, wrapped him tightly in his blanket, and whispered soothing words she didn't entirely believe herself. "It'll be all right, Malik, I promise. I'll find a way." But deep down, she knew promises weren't enough. Her father's funeral loomed later that day, a gathering that should have been a place of mourning and respect, yet now carried the weight of an impossible choice: seek help and risk humiliation, or do nothing and watch her brother's condition worsen. Her feet moved almost automatically toward the bus stop, the morning mist curling around her like a shroud. Her hands were cold, trembling, and her thoughts raced. What if no one listened? What if she was laughed at, dismissed, or worse? She remembered the stories her father had told her about people who judged others for their clothes, their skin, their place in life. And she knew that the world could be cruel. But desperation made even fear pliable. Janelle's heart ached with the injustice of it all. Here she was, a girl who had never asked for anything extravagant, who had worked tirelessly to care for her family, and yet she was about to beg for a solution in a world that barely saw her. The weight of poverty and grief pressed against her chest, and for a moment she wished she could vanish into the shadows of her father's old study, where the memories of laughter and guidance had once filled the room. But she couldn't vanish. Malik depended on her. She swallowed hard, pushing the fear down and summoning a courage she didn't feel. She rehearsed what she would say over and over in her mind. "Please, I need help. My brother, he's very sick." The words felt small and fragile, yet they were all she had. The bus arrived, screeching to a halt, its doors opening like a gaping mouth ready to swallow her into the chaos of the city. She stepped inside, her hand gripping the pole for balance, feeling the eyes of strangers on her as she tried to disappear into the crowd. Some looked away politely, some stared with curiosity, and one man muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, "Look at her, thinking she belongs here." Each judgment, real or imagined, cut her like a knife. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, but the thought of Malik's fragile body lying alone in their apartment gave her the resolve to continue. She whispered another promise into the empty air. "I will fix this, Malik. I will fix this." When the bus reached the stop near the city's upscale district, she hesitated. The streets ahead were lined with luxury stores, sleek offices, and polished glass doors that seemed to sneer at her as she approached. Here she was certain she would be judged not just by her appearance but by her very existence. Her dress was modest, her shoes scuffed, and her hair pulled back in a simple braid. Against the backdrop of wealth and power, she knew she would look and likely feel like an intruder. Her chest tightened, tears threatening to spill over. She had no choice. Every other option had failed. She thought of her father's lessons: courage in the face of injustice, dignity in the face of humiliation, and hope even when it seemed impossible. And yet stepping forward meant stepping into a storm she couldn't predict. As she approached the building where she had been told someone might help, her hand paused on the polished handle of the front door. She inhaled, the city sounds dulling around her as her fear threatened to overtake her. The weight of her brother's need, the urgency of his illness, and the haunting shame of possibly being mocked in front of strangers pressed her to the ground. But she stood tall. Finally, she whispered to herself, barely audibly, "I have no other choice." With trembling fingers, she pushed the door open, stepping into a world that would not offer her kindness freely. The air inside was warm, artificially scented, and buzzing with the murmur of people who moved with a confidence she could barely comprehend. Her modest frame seemed swallowed by the grandeur around her, and for a fleeting second the fear threatened to paralyze her. But then she remembered Malik's cough, the look in his small eyes yesterday when he had begged her to make it better. And that single thought gave her the courage to step forward, heart pounding, ready to face whatever judgment awaited her. What she didn't know, couldn't yet know, was that the humiliation she feared so deeply was already waiting for her. In that room, among the polished floors and silent observers, one person's cruel intentions would collide with her desperate need, setting the stage for the storm that would define the rest of the day. And so, with her heart racing and courage flickering like a candle in the wind, Janelle prepared herself to speak the words that would change everything. "Please, I need help." The streets seemed endless as Janelle walked, each step echoing against the towering buildings that rose like silent sentinels around her. The city, alive with early morning activity, felt both familiar and alien. Car horns blared in the distance, footsteps clattered on the pavement, and the occasional burst of laughter from passing strangers sounded almost cruel in its normalcy. She clutched her small purse tighter, as if it could somehow shield her from the judgment she feared awaited her. Every block brought a mixture of dread and anticipation. She passed cafes where the aroma of freshly baked pastries filled the air, their glass windows displaying patrons with perfect coffee cups and polished shoes. The contrast between their world and hers was painfully sharp. She tugged her braid behind her shoulder, feeling the weight of her modest black dress, and prayed silently that it would be enough to protect her dignity in a world that valued appearance over humanity. Her mind raced as she approached the building. What if they laugh at me? What if no one listens? What if they throw me out? The questions spiraled endlessly, each one like a stone pressing heavier on her chest. Her legs ached from the brisk pace she had maintained, but she refused to slow down. Malik's cough, his pleading eyes from yesterday, and the urgency of his condition pushed her forward with a force stronger than her fear. Janelle paused at a crosswalk, glancing up at the towering office where she was headed. The glass facade reflected the sky and the city around her, dazzling in its perfection, impenetrable and unyielding. People in crisp suits and polished shoes moved inside, their faces calm and commanding as though the world bent to their will. She took a deep breath, her chest tight, and reminded herself, you have to try. You can't let fear win. The pedestrians around her moved in waves, some brushing past without notice, some glancing with mild curiosity. She imagined their thoughts. Who is she to step here? What does she want? The judgment was invisible but palpable. Every glance felt like a small dagger, every whisper, real or imagined, a confirmation of her outsider status. Her journey wasn't just physical, it was a mental battle. She replayed possible scenarios in her head, the receptionist dismissing her with a condescending smile, the staff questioning her worthiness, even the possibility of being mocked in front of a crowd. And yet, for every fear, there was a tiny flicker of hope. Somewhere, someone must understand. Somewhere, someone must see me for who I am, not just the clothes I wear or the neighborhood I come from. As she neared the entrance, the opulence of the building became even more overwhelming. Polished marble floors gleamed through the glass doors, gold-plated handles reflected the sunlight, and a doorman in a sharp uniform nodded politely at every visitor. Janelle's reflection in the glass door seemed small and fragile, yet determined. She pressed her hand against the cool metal handle, fingers trembling slightly, and inhaled, forcing herself to stand taller. Her heart pounded, a rapid rhythm that echoed in her ears, but beneath the fear there was a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't just about her. It was about Malik, about the promise she had made to herself and to her father's memory. The stakes were higher than pride, higher than shame, higher than the judgment of the people around her. This was life and death. Janelle thought back to her father's words, spoken during those quiet evenings at home. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. She clung to that memory like a lifeline, feeling a flicker of strength spark within her chest. For the first time that morning, fear and hope walked side by side, each step forward fueled by the necessity to act, not by the desire to escape. The doorman gave her a polite nod, and she nodded back, her hands still shaking. She stepped into the lobby, and the warmth of the interior contrasted sharply with the chill of the morning air. The polished marble, the crystal chandeliers, and the hushed elegance of the environment only amplified her sense of inadequacy, but it also illuminated the path ahead. She was here. She had made it this far. Janelle paused for a moment, gathering her courage. The receptionist behind the sleek counter gave her a questioning glance, one eyebrow slightly raised, and she could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down. The anxiety surged, but she breathed deeply, reminding herself of why she had come. Every second that passed in hesitation was another second her brother went without the medicine he desperately needed. She whispered softly under her breath, as if speaking to Malik's spirit beside her, "I'm here, I'll do this. I won't let fear stop me." And with that, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold fully into the domain where judgment awaited, where the confrontation she had feared all morning would finally take shape. For a brief moment, the lobby seemed to hold its breath, the hum of air conditioning and soft footsteps creating a suspended silence that made her heart pound even harder. Every polished surface reflected not just her image, but the vulnerability she carried with her, the small, trembling figure who had dared to hope that the world might listen, that compassion could still exist in a place built on wealth, power, and appearances. And then she saw it, the figure waiting at the front, the one who would not just judge but attempt to humiliate her. Her stomach twisted, fear threatened to overtake hope, and yet she took another step forward, holding onto the fragile courage that had carried her this far. This was the point of no return, the moment where fear and hope collided, and in that collision a storm was about to erupt, one that would challenge everything she had believed about herself, about justice, and about the power of standing tall when the world demanded she fall. Janelle's foot crossed the threshold, and the lobby seemed to shift around her. Crystal chandeliers cast a cold light that made the polished marble floors gleam like ice, each reflection multiplying her vulnerability. Her heart hammered, every beat a drum of dread, and then she saw her. Mrs. Caldwell stood near the front desk, arms crossed, chin tilted slightly upward as though the world existed solely to entertain her. Her perfectly tailored suit and gleaming accessories screamed authority, and her gaze locked on Janelle like a predator sizing up its prey. The moment their eyes met, Janelle felt the air tighten around her chest. "Well, well," Mrs. Caldwell began, her voice a venomous melody, drawing the attention of nearby staff and visitors. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence." Her lips curled into a smirk. "I wasn't sure if you'd have the courage to show up." Janelle swallowed hard, her voice catching in her throat. She tried to steady her hands, but the tremors betrayed her. "I came for help," she whispered, her words barely audible over the hum of the lobby. "Help," Mrs. Caldwell laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Oh, sweetie, don't make me laugh. What help could someone like you possibly need in a place like this?" She gestured broadly at the luxurious surroundings, as if the walls themselves were a monument to Janelle's inadequacy. Whispers spread quickly. Some onlookers leaned closer, curious, phones raised to capture every moment. Others merely stared, mouths slightly open, unsure if they should intervene, but no one did. The silence of the crowd felt heavier than any insult. Janelle's face burned, but she forced herself to stand tall. "It's for my brother, he's sick. Oh, of course," Mrs. Caldwell interrupted, rolling her eyes in exaggerated disbelief. "Your brother, always the victim, aren't we?" She leaned closer, voice dropping so it carried both disdain and mockery. "Tell me, do you really think anyone here will take you seriously? Look at you. Your shoes, that dress, you're barely holding yourself together, and yet you expect help." The sting of her words cut deep, and tears threatened to spill over. Janelle blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. She had faced hardship before, but public humiliation, especially from someone who seemed to relish every word, felt like a blade twisting in her chest. A few bystanders shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. "Poor thing, do you think she belongs here? Should someone do something?" But none stepped forward. The moral courage to intervene was swallowed by fear of drawing attention, or worse, aligning themselves against someone as powerful as Mrs. Caldwell. Janelle's voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Please, I just need some help for the medicine." Mrs. Caldwell's smirk widened. "Medicine? You expect charity in the form of medicine from me? Don't you understand the world isn't kind to people like you? People from neighborhoods like yours?" She waved a hand dismissively, letting the words hang in the air like acid. "I have no patience for entitlement masked as desperation." Janelle's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to retreat, to run, to hide in some corner where nobody could see her humiliation. But she couldn't, not yet. Malik's face flashed in her mind, pale and trembling, begging her to make it better. That memory stoked a fragile ember of courage inside her chest, keeping her rooted despite the onslaught. Mrs. Caldwell leaned even closer, her voice softening just enough to make the insult feel intimate, invasive. "Do you really think your father's memory means anything here? That a sob story will earn you a seat among people who actually matter. Honey, you're out of your league." The crowd watched in silence, some shifting uncomfortably, others whispering or recording the scene. Janelle felt their eyes like daggers, prying into every flaw, every tremor, every tear she could not fully suppress. In that moment, she realized the cruelty wasn't just in Mrs. Caldwell, it was in the world around her, the people who looked on but did nothing. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words choked in her throat. Her body trembled. I'm only asking," she began, voice cracking under the weight of fear and shame, but Mrs. Caldwell wasn't finished. She let out a sharp laugh that drew the attention of every staff member nearby. "Only asking," she said, tilting her head mockingly. "Darling, life doesn't work that way. You ask, you plead, and sometimes, people like you still leave empty-handed." Her words hung in the air like a noose tightening around Janelle's heart. The humiliation, the judgment, the silence of those around her. It was almost unbearable. Janelle's knees felt weak, her vision blurred slightly with tears she refused to release. She wanted to retreat, to run away from the icy mockery and indifferent crowd. But her resolve, fragile as it was, held her in place. She had come too far to turn back. And then, just as Mrs. Caldwell's smirk grew dangerously triumphant, a small ripple of tension moved through the lobby. A presence, a subtle but undeniable shift, slipped through the murmuring crowd. Someone was watching, assessing, waiting. Someone who seemed to know more than they should, someone who could change everything in an instant. Janelle didn't notice it fully yet, but instinct stirred within her. Something unseen, powerful, was about to intervene. Janelle's legs felt like lead, her body trembling with exhaustion, not from walking, but from the relentless storm of judgment and ridicule battering her from every angle. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths as tears, hot and unbidden, finally spilled down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, desperate to hide her weakness, but they betrayed her, leaving shiny trails down her face that reflected the harsh lobby lights. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes glinted with triumph, the smirk never leaving her lips. "Oh, don't cry, dear," she said, her tone mockingly gentle, like a cat toying with a mouse. "It doesn't make this any better. In fact, it only confirms what everyone here already knows. You're out of your depth. Pathetic, really." Janelle's throat tightened. Words failed her completely. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that her request was not arrogance but desperation. She wanted to scream that she had done nothing wrong, that she had dignity even if the world refused to recognize it. But all she could do was shake, her voice dissolving into a trembling whisper. I'm only trying to help my brother." A few onlookers shifted uneasily, murmuring softly to one another. "This is harsh, she's just a girl. Shouldn't someone do something?" But none did. Their silence was deafening, a confirmation of everything Mrs. Caldwell had already implied. That Janelle had no allies here, that her struggle was hers alone. Mrs. Caldwell leaned closer, her presence a suffocating force. "Your father's memory won't save you here," she hissed. "Do you understand? No amount of sobbing, no amount of pleading will make people care about someone like you. This is the reality of the world, harsh, unyielding, and indifferent, and today you're learning it the hard way." The weight of her words crushed Janelle. She could feel her knees weaken, a dizzying mix of grief, shame, and fear threatening to make her collapse. Her vision swam with the faces of strangers, all looking at her as though she were something less than human. Every whispered comment, every sidelong glance felt like another stone added to the heap of humiliation pressing her into the floor beneath her. She wanted to leave, to vanish from the lobby, from Mrs. Caldwell, from the judgmental eyes that watched her every move. She imagined walking back out into the cold streets, retreating to the safety of their cramped apartment where at least she wouldn't be mocked so openly. But even that offered no real comfort. Malik's fragile form, his coughs from the night before, and the urgent need for medicine tore at her conscience. Leaving would be surrender, letting fear dictate the fate of the person she loved most. Her tears fell more freely now, and her voice trembled even more as she tried to speak. "Please, I just need." The words faltered, breaking mid-sentence, swallowed by the overwhelming presence of cruelty that surrounded her. Mrs. Caldwell's smile widened, eyes narrowing with cruel delight. "Look at her," she said, loudly enough for the room to hear. "She's crumbling in front of everyone. How pathetic, how utterly powerless, and she calls herself a daughter. If this is the legacy your father left, I shudder to think what kind of family he really had." Janelle's hands flew to her face instinctively, covering her cheeks as she tried to hold herself together. Her mind spun with helplessness. How could one person endure such relentless cruelty, such public exposure, and not feel utterly alone? Each moment of silence from the crowd felt heavier than the verbal attacks. Their inaction, their unwillingness to intervene, was a form of violence she could not escape. The lobby, with its gleaming floors and polished walls, now felt like a cage. Every glint of light seemed to highlight her insignificance. The luxury that surrounded her wasn't inspiring. It was a reminder of what she lacked, of how far removed she was from the world Mrs. Caldwell inhabited. The disparity between them wasn't just material. It was a chasm of social judgment, a stark demonstration of power wielded without conscience. Janelle's mind wandered to her father, to the lessons of courage he had tried to instill. But now, in the face of relentless humiliation, even those words felt distant, almost unreachable. Where is courage when no one else will help? She wondered bitterly. Where is dignity when the world chooses to watch you suffer? For a brief, agonizing moment, she considered retreating completely, not just leaving the lobby, but surrendering to despair entirely. The thought of giving up, of letting fear win, was tantalizing in its promise of relief from the crushing weight of judgment. She imagined curling up somewhere dark where no one could see her cry and letting the world forget her existence. But then, somewhere deep in the pit of her heart, a spark refused to die. It was small, flickering, but undeniable. The memory of Malik's innocent eyes, the urgency of his illness, the father she had loved and lost, these were chains that pulled her back from the edge. She would not abandon the fight, not yet. Her knees shook, her body quivered, and her tears fell freely. But with every faltering breath, a fragile seed of determination pushed against the tide of despair. She lifted her head slightly, glancing around the room with a mixture of fear and defiance. Somewhere in that sea of indifference, she knew there was a possibility of change. Someone might see her. Someone might intervene. And then, almost imperceptibly, she noticed it, a subtle shift in the crowd. A presence at the back of the room that didn't belong, someone who stood apart, calm and composed, observing with quiet authority. Janelle didn't know who it was yet, but instinct whispered that this person held the potential to turn her world upside down, in the way she had longed for, yet never dared to imagine. Her body sagged under the weight of humiliation, but hope, a faint, fragile, unyielding hope, stirred within her chest. And at that exact moment, she realized that her rock bottom wasn't the end. Something was coming, something that could change everything. The tension in the lobby was almost tangible, the kind of oppressive silence that made Janelle's chest feel as if it were being pressed by an invisible weight. She stood trembling, shoulders hunched, tears streaking her cheeks, the humiliation from Mrs. Caldwell's relentless words embedding itself into every nerve. The crowd seemed frozen, unsure if they were witnessing justice or cruelty. And then, without warning, a presence cut through the thick air like a lighthouse-piercing fog. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, each footfall measured, commanding attention without even trying. Mr. Harrison, a man in his late 40s, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, moved with the quiet confidence of someone who owned not just the building, but the moral authority within it. His hair was streaked with gray, giving him an air of experience and gravitas, but it was the calm, unwavering gaze that truly drew eyes to him. There was no arrogance in it, only quiet assurance, a magnetic calm that contrasted sharply with the hostility surrounding Janelle. He stopped a few feet away from her, bending slightly not to diminish himself but to meet her on her level. His voice, when he spoke, was soft yet resonant, a tone that carried authority without intimidation. "Miss Thompson," he said gently, his eyes scanning hers with warmth. "Are you all right?" Janelle blinked, startled. His presence was like a lifeline thrown into the sea of her despair. For the first time since stepping into the lobby, she felt a flicker of relief. I'm fine," she stammered, but even she knew it was a lie. Her voice trembled, but not from fear alone. There was something about his presence that made courage feel possible, even in the face of relentless humiliation. Mrs. Caldwell's smirk faltered slightly, her eyebrows knitting together in mild irritation. She glanced at the man, clearly unrecognizing the threat he posed. "And who exactly are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp now, laced with condescension. "Another one of these do-gooders trying to parade themselves as heroes? I don't have time for—" Mr. Harrison raised a hand, calm and deliberate, halting her mid-sentence. "I am simply someone who does not tolerate injustice in my presence," he said softly but firmly. The room seemed to hold its breath, the hum of air conditioning and distant whispers fading into silence as every eye turned toward him. There was an authority in his voice that demanded attention, a quiet power that didn't need to shout. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed, her condescension flaring. "Injustice, please, this girl—" "Enough," Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice sharper now but still controlled. "This ends right now." The calm certainty in his words cut through the lobby like steel. Every bystander felt it, a sudden, undeniable shift in power. Janelle, still trembling, could barely process what was happening. She looked at him with wide, astonished eyes, the first real hope she had felt all morning igniting in her chest. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice caught in her throat. His calm presence alone was enough to steady her quivering hands. Mrs. Caldwell, visibly irritated, straightened her posture, trying to reclaim her perceived authority. "Who do you think you are, barging into my—" "I am someone who recognizes cruelty when I see it," Mr. Harrison said, his voice firm but measured. "And I will not allow it to continue." There was no threat in his posture, yet every word landed like a hammer on the fragile veneer of Mrs. Caldwell's control. The room shifted subtly. People leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment, the weight of someone who could hold power without ever raising a hand. For Janelle, it was like a lifeline had been thrown across the chasm of her despair. She felt a small, steady pulse of courage returning to her chest. She dared to lift her chin slightly, to meet Mrs. Caldwell's gaze not with shame, but with the fragile hope that she might finally be seen, truly seen, by someone who understood the injustice she had endured. The lobby remained frozen. Cameras and smartphones hovered mid-recording, the crowd unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Mrs. Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line, clearly unaccustomed to anyone challenging her authority, much less someone who carried both social and moral weight in his presence. She searched for words, but Mr. Harrison's calm assurance created a barrier she could not breach. "You've humiliated her enough," he continued, softer this time, speaking to Mrs. Caldwell as if correcting a wayward child. "I expect you to show some decency in this moment, and if you cannot, then the consequences will follow." His tone was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge beneath the surface. Janelle's heart thumped wildly. For the first time that morning, she felt that the humiliation might end, that the oppressive weight of judgment, cruelty, and indifference could be lifted. And though she didn't yet know who this man truly was, or the extent of the power he wielded, she felt a surge of gratitude she could barely put into words. Mrs. Caldwell's smirk faltered entirely, replaced by a flicker of unease. She glanced around the lobby, finally noticing the stares of the crowd, the phones aimed in their direction, the subtle shift in energy that made her realize she was no longer the dominant figure. She opened her mouth to respond, but the authority in Mr. Harrison's presence, calm, unwavering, uncompromising, froze her words before they could escape. Janelle took a tentative breath, still trembling but a step closer to relief. She could feel the tension in the room, the shifting balance of power. The storm that had felt so overwhelming only moments ago was now meeting its first resistance. The calm in the middle of chaos had arrived. But she had no idea how deeply this man's presence would alter everything. He wasn't just a mediator, a comforting figure. He held the keys to a truth that no one in that room expected, a truth that would soon shatter the arrogance and cruelty she had endured all morning. And just as Mrs. Caldwell opened her mouth again, still unaware of the identity standing before her, the stage was set for the moment that would change everything. The air in the lobby was heavy, charged with anticipation. Mrs. Caldwell's smirk had faded, replaced by a tight, forced smile, but she refused to step back. "And just who do you think you are to tell me?" "I think you've underestimated the wrong person," Mr. Harrison interrupted, his calm tone slicing through her protest. The room held its collective breath, the murmurs of the crowd fading into silence. Every eye was fixed on him, on the quiet authority he exuded. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with an elegance that seemed almost ceremonial. Mrs. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, suspicion and irritation flashing across her face. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice sharp but slightly unsteady. "And what, pray tell, makes you think?" "I am not here as a passerby," Mr. Harrison said, his voice steady and deliberate. "I am the owner of this building, the CEO of this company, and as of today I am in charge of ensuring that justice is upheld no matter who it offends." The room froze. Cameras tilted, smartphones hovered mid-air. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Mrs. Caldwell's jaw dropped in disbelief, her carefully maintained composure unraveling with alarming speed. "You, what?" she stammered, voice shaking now. You own this place?" "Yes," Mr. Harrison said simply, his eyes locking onto hers with unflinching intensity. "And every word you have spoken to this young woman, every insult, every act of humiliation has been noted. You will answer for it." Janelle blinked, her chest tightening as the realization began to sink in. The man who had stepped forward with calm authority was not merely an observer. He held absolute power over the very space where she had been shamed. And in that moment, every cruel word, every public sneer that had crushed her spirit, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the justice now poised to be delivered. Mrs. Caldwell's hands trembled slightly as she stepped back. Her perfectly calculated arrogance now felt small, fragile, exposed. I didn't know. You didn't need to know, Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice firm, carrying a weight that brooked no argument. What matters is that the truth is now clear to everyone. You do not get to humiliate, demean, or belittle someone under my oversight. Your actions have consequences. The crowd reacted immediately. Phones were raised to capture the moment, whispers of astonishment rippling through the onlookers. People who had watched silently before now murmured openly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others expressing relief that justice had arrived. She didn't deserve that. Finally, someone steps in. I can't believe he's the CEO. Janelle's knees felt weak, and yet she stood a little taller, her body trembling with a mixture of shock, relief, and cautious hope. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she said, You're the CEO. Mr. Harrison nodded gently, his eyes warm as they met hers. Yes, Janelle, and I want you to know that everything you've endured today, the cruelty, the humiliation, it ends now. His words felt like a balm, soothing the raw ache in her chest. Mrs. Caldwell's face had gone pale, her confidence shattered in real time. But I was just... You were just cruel, Mr. Harrison said simply, cutting through her protests. And cruelty has no place here. You will face the consequences of your actions, starting immediately. He nodded toward a security officer who had appeared silently at his side. Escort her from the premises and document this incident for formal review. Janelle's heart thumped wildly, a mixture of awe and relief coursing through her veins. She could hardly believe the reversal of fortune. The woman who had held power over her just moments ago now looked small, defeated, powerless. Crowd's energy shifted, curiosity and tension replaced by admiration and vindication. People whispered about the CEO's intervention, their admiration palpable, while Mrs. Caldwell's arrogance crumbled in the harsh light of truth. Mr. Harrison's gaze softened, and he turned back to Janelle. You are brave, Janelle, he said, his voice low, carrying both respect and compassion. Today you stood in the face of humiliation, and you did not back down. That courage deserves to be recognized, not punished. Janelle's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were different, tears of relief, disbelief, and an overwhelming gratitude she could hardly express. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, he replied, smiling gently. You only need to know that this moment is yours and no one can take it away from you. Not now, not ever. The lobby, which had been a place of humiliation and fear just minutes ago, now felt transformed, a space of vindication, justice, and newfound hope. Janelle took a deep breath, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The weight of shame, judgment, and isolation lifted, replaced by a sense of security she had never thought possible. Mrs. Caldwell, escorted from the room, cast one final glance back at Janelle, her expression a mix of disbelief and fear. She had no words, no power, no influence here, her authority entirely dismantled by the truth and the presence of someone who had the courage to act when it mattered most. And as the room slowly returned to a state of calm, Janelle realized something profound. The storm she had endured that morning, the humiliation, the fear, the loneliness, it had not defeated her. It had brought her to a moment where courage met justice, where integrity met power, and where hope finally became tangible. For Janelle, this was more than a revelation. It was a turning point. And as she stood there, trembling yet resolute, she knew that the world could indeed be fair, and that compassion, when wielded with courage, could change everything. The air in the lobby had shifted completely. Where moments ago humiliation and fear had ruled, now authority and justice reigned. Mrs. Caldwell, once brimming with arrogance, now stood small and trembling as two security officers escorted her toward the elevators. The whispers of the crowd followed her, a mixture of astonishment and satisfaction. Cameras captured every step, and Janelle watched, a mix of disbelief and vindication blooming inside her chest. Mr. Harrison turned toward the crowd, his voice calm but firm. Let this be a reminder to everyone present. Cruelty, arrogance, and prejudice have no place here. Accountability is not negotiable. His words reverberated in the marble-lined room, commanding attention without a trace of malice, but with undeniable finality. Janelle felt a warm rush of relief flood her. The woman who had mocked her, belittled her, and sought to crush her spirit would no longer have power over her life, or anyone else. But Mr. Harrison's attention wasn't just on punishment. He stepped closer to Janelle, his eyes softening as he smiled gently. "You've endured more than anyone should," he said, his tone almost paternal. "And you did it with courage. That deserves more than just recognition. It deserves action." Janelle blinked, her voice barely audible. "Action? What do you mean?" "I mean this," Mr. Harrison replied, extending his hand not as an employer or a figure of authority, but as someone offering true support. "You will not only receive the help you came here for today, but you and your family will be cared for in every way necessary. Education, housing, medical care, everything to ensure that your brother and you can thrive without fear or suffering." Janelle's hands trembled as she took a step forward. Tears, this time of gratitude and disbelief, rolled freely down her cheeks. I don't know what to say," she whispered. I've never. "I don't even know how to." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice gentle but unwavering. "You only need to accept that you are worthy, that your family deserves dignity, safety, and hope. Today marks the beginning of that." A hush fell over the room as staff and bystanders realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. People who had been mere spectators of humiliation now bore witness to compassion in action. Some quietly wiped tears from their eyes, others shook their heads in disbelief at the justice they were seeing unfold. Meanwhile, Mrs. Caldwell's humiliation reached a new height. In the presence of the very person whose authority she had sought to assert, she faced immediate consequences. The formal review Mr. Harrison had mentioned wasn't empty words. HR personnel and company executives quickly documented her actions, ensuring that her arrogance and cruelty would have permanent repercussions. She had no allies in the room, no defenses to call upon, no excuses that could shield her. Justice was swift, certain, and uncompromising. Janelle felt her chest lift with a lightness she hadn't known in months. The tension that had coiled in her shoulders, the weight of every cruel word she had endured, began to dissipate. She turned to Mr. Harrison, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. I don't know how to thank you. You've changed everything for me, for Malik, for my family." He smiled, a warm, reassuring expression that carried decades of wisdom and compassion. "You've already changed everything for yourself, Janelle. You stood tall when it mattered most. Today isn't about me, it's about your courage. And now that courage will be met with the support it deserves." He gestured toward a discreet line of staff, ready to assist. "We'll start by arranging the medicine for Malik immediately. Then we'll ensure your family has a home where you can feel safe. And after that, we'll discuss education and long-term support. Nothing you face should ever be this hard again." Janelle's lips trembled as she tried to form words, but she only managed a choked, Thank you, SHH, Mr. Harrison said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No words needed. Your life is about to change. Today, you see what compassion paired with power can do, and you deserve every bit of it." As the crowd watched, the atmosphere transformed from tense hostility to quiet reverence. Some whispered words of support, others offered nods of respect, and Janelle felt for the first time that she was truly seen, not as an outsider, not as someone to be mocked, but as a person worthy of respect, care, and dignity. Malik's life would no longer be at the mercy of scarcity. Her family would have stability, safety, and opportunity. And most importantly, Janelle herself, once trembling, humiliated, and silenced, now stood empowered, validated, and supported. The arc of cruelty had been broken, replaced by justice and compassion in equal measure. In that moment, as Mr. Harrison guided her through the next steps of support, Janelle realized a profound truth. It wasn't just power or wealth that could change lives. It was the courage to act with kindness and integrity, even when the world seemed indifferent. And in that kindness, a life of suffering could transform into a life of opportunity, dignity, and hope. The morning sun filtered gently through the wide windows of Janelle's new home, casting warm light on walls that were once bare and cold. Birds chirped outside, a soundtrack of normalcy and peace that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the day that had once defined her life. She moved quietly through the kitchen, pouring a glass of water for Malik, who now sat at the table, fully alert and smiling, his cough a distant memory thanks to the medicine that had finally reached him. Gone were the days of fear and uncertainty. The apartment, modest yet comfortable, was a sanctuary for her family, a place where safety and dignity were guaranteed. Every corner reflected the transformation she had experienced. New furniture, books lining the shelves, sunlight warming the rooms where once darkness and anxiety had lingered. But it wasn't just the material changes that mattered. It was the profound sense of security, hope, and possibility that now filled every space. Janelle paused for a moment, glancing at Malik as he carefully read through a book Mr. Harrison had gifted him. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She thought back to the humiliation, the fear, and the despair that had threatened to crush her spirit. The memories were still sharp, but they no longer held power over her. She had survived, endured, and emerged stronger, supported not just by the generosity of one powerful man, but by her own courage to confront injustice. Her gaze shifted to the small garden outside the window, where flowers bloomed in vibrant colors. She remembered how, before this life-changing day, she had only dreamt of such beauty for her children, for her family. Now it was real, a symbol of growth, resilience, and the rewards of standing tall in the face of adversity. Mr. Harrison had not just provided immediate aid, he had ensured long-term support. Malik's education was fully funded, and Janelle herself was enrolled in a program to continue her studies and pursue the career she had once only dared to imagine. Health care, housing, and stability were no longer dreams. They were realities, a tangible reflection of compassion in action. Janelle's mother, who had watched her daughter endure humiliation with a silent strength born of love, now embraced the peace that had finally entered their lives. The once tense air of worry that had clung to the small family apartment was replaced with laughter, warmth, and the freedom to imagine a future unburdened by fear. Sitting with Malik and her mother, Janelle reflected on the lessons learned. She realized that the world could be cruel, but it could also be profoundly kind, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. One person's courage to intervene, one act of compassion, could ripple outward, touching lives, changing destinies, and restoring hope where it had been almost extinguished. The memory of Mrs. Caldwell, the arrogance, the cruelty, and the public humiliation, remained a reminder of how swiftly injustice could appear. But it was now balanced by the overwhelming proof that integrity, courage, and compassion could triumph in ways that changed lives forever. Janelle stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once seemed so hostile, so indifferent. Now it felt different, not because the city itself had changed, but because she had found her place in it. She had been seen, heard, and supported. Her life, once defined by struggle, was now defined by opportunity, growth, and the chance to help others in turn. Her eyes caught the morning sunlight glinting off a passing car, and she smiled, a smile unburdened, genuine, full of hope. She had been tested, humiliated, and pushed to the brink. Yet here she was, standing tall, stronger than she had ever imagined, a testament to resilience and courage. And it wasn't just about her family. Janelle now dedicated herself to helping others, using the platform she had been given to support children and families in need. She volunteered, advocated, and spoke openly about her experiences, ensuring that no one else would have to endure the kind of public humiliation she had survived alone. Compassion, she had learned, multiplied when shared. Malik bounded toward her, his laughter bright and unrestrained. "Janelle, look, I can finally read this whole book," he exclaimed, holding it up proudly. She laughed, picking him up and spinning him around, the sound of her joy echoing through the once quiet rooms. In that moment, she felt a peace she had never known, a certainty that courage and kindness were forces capable of transforming lives in ways far beyond imagination. And so the moral became clear. Cruelty may strike, injustice may seem insurmountable, but courage, integrity, and compassion can rewrite even the darkest days. One person's willingness to act with kindness, coupled with another's strength to endure, can create ripples that transform not just a life, but an entire family and eventually a community. Janelle paused for a final moment, looking at the sunlight streaming through the windows, her heart full. She thought of the viewers, of those who might watch her story and feel the sting of unfairness themselves. She knew that hope existed, even in the darkest circumstances, and that the power of one compassionate act could change everything. "Remember this," she whispered softly, almost to herself. "Stand tall, show courage, and never underestimate the power of kindness." The room felt alive with possibility, and Janelle knew that her life and the lives of those she loved would never be the same. The past had tested her, the present had transformed her, and the future, bright, secure, and filled with opportunity, awaited. So to every viewer watching, let this story remind you that compassion matters. Stand up for those in need. Show kindness when the world seems indifferent. And never forget, the smallest act of courage can change a life forever. If Janelle's journey moved you, share this story with someone who needs hope today, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more inspirational stories of courage, compassion, and triumph over adversity.